Hi, welcome to our Digital Voices webinar. Really excited to have you join us today. As you know, all of our webinars are live and interactive. So I'll remind you a couple times, but if there's anything that we talk about that you have another question, you can enter those questions in the question box. Or if there's something that we didn't cover and you think we should cover, or perhaps you disagree with, please interact with us. And we're pretty good at getting back to all the comments or the majority of comments and questions. So love to have that level of interaction. And so we'll just get started. So we're going to talk about digital transformation, right? Still a hot topic. And we're going to look at it from a slightly different perspective in terms of the past, present, and future. We won't spend a tremendous amount of time on the past, only to say, look, this is where we've been, and this is where we're headed. And we'll spend more time on the present and the future, but sometimes it's helpful to kind of review the past because that's a foundation for us. Also, we don't want to repeat any mistakes. And then with all of these different areas, past, present, future, sort of talk about some practical action steps. So I'm joined today with a good friend, colleague, industry luminaire, Oliver Lingnell, and I'll let Oliver introduce himself. So welcome, Oliver, and please share with the audience a little bit about yourself.
Thanks very much, Ed. I'm delighted to be here. I've been doing digital innovation. My bio says more than 25 years. I'm going to say now it's 3 decades. But I've had the unique pleasure of working in digital innovation from a number of perspectives. I started out in technology roles. I was a developer, implementer, working at software companies. Then I had a long stint actually in industry. I held leadership roles at Kaiser Permanente and Cigna, and then quite a chunk of time in consulting, including Accenture and leading the provider business consulting practice for Cognizant. But the last 4 or 5 years, I've really been focused on digital strategy and innovation at Avia. And Avia is a fantastic organization. We're a leader in accelerating digital for health systems. We work with about 50 plus health systems all across the US who are members, and we work with them in a variety of ways, and they're standalone hospitals, regional players, faith-based organizations, AMCs, children's hospitals, etc. So we feel we've got a good handle on the pulse of what's happening in the industry, and honestly, it's an exciting position to be in, to work with so many innovative leaders on their digital strategies. So great place to be, and that's a little bit about my background.
All right, awesome. So everyone can see why I've asked Oliver to join us. Plus, he's sort of an informal mentor of my own. He's full of wisdom, full of ideas, knows the industry so well. Yeah, and Avia is just a stellar marquee organization. So that's awesome. So let's jump right into the past. And when we say past, in healthcare tech, we're just looking at 1 to 3 years. And so we want to do a short perspective. Like, Oliver, what do you think might have been the 2 or 3 biggest sort of transformation? I know we're going to reuse that word over and over in healthcare, like in the past couple of years. What have been some of the big movers and shakers?
To me, I would call out a few. One, this idea of the digital front door, creating a convenient and easy, smartphone access to healthcare providers, scheduling, searching, all of that is, I think, has been a big trend in the last couple of years. I think changing the ambulatory delivery model from one that is primarily focused on brick and mortar to one that is increasingly digital, that's really, that's a change that continues and has been accelerated by COVID, but we've seen that growing for a while. And then I think the third thing I would add is really the emergence of disruptive models of care and disruptive players in healthcare, whether it's the Apple Watch, a driving change in consumer behavior, or organizations like 98.6 having a disruptive digital first model of care inexpensively in all 50 states, or Carbon Health really creating this hybrid between digital and physical. Another example is great is Oak Street, an organization that's focused on the Medicare population exclusively and changing really the way care is delivered for outstanding results. So lots of interesting disruptors. You can throw in there Best Buy, and others that are really extending their reach into the healthcare ecosystem from retail.
Yeah, those are all really good and powerful. And I just want to say, I know many in the audience might be listening to that thinking, oh, that's still where we are today. And that's because a lot of these are long-term transitions. But yeah, in some cases, we will talk about, look, what are a couple things that you can do to make sure you're on that same trajectory and thinking about the future, or creating the future. The other one I would add too, I think we've been doing a lot of operational focus, which can be transformational as well.
Yes.
And cleaning up the technical debt, those sort of things. I think those organizations who were able to spend a lot of time pre-pandemic on that have really benefited, because then they could focus more on the sort of the new care models and the virtual care. But that's something that if you haven't had a chance to do, not to jump ahead into recommendations, but that might be one thing if you find yourself still a little bit in the past, is really focus on the operational things and taking care of that technical debt, app rationalization, those sort of things, because it is part of business transformation. And then you can reallocate those expenses elsewhere and do transformative things. Yeah, so that's good. I'm trying to think, Oliver, if we had to say which one, it could be a new one that we didn't say, but which one of these things do you think has been the biggest, if you could select one, like the biggest sort of change that we've experienced?
Well, it's one that's probably on the top of, or near the top of everyone's minds, and that's COVID. COVID has been a game changer. It's taken those things like the digital front door, the ambulatory delivery model and disruptors, and it's given them not just tailwinds, but I would say like a nitro boost. I think I read something perhaps from the advisory board that the new normal for virtual visits is like 32x what it was before COVID. And what that's done is today is those things that were sort of experimental and changing, a couple years ago, they're mainstream now, and many are really in the current state, really looking back at their strategies and saying, hey, I need to readjust, because this isn't like a passing fancy. This isn't something that's going to grow slowly, like value-based care, not to ding it, because I think it's great, but right, that's one that's been a creeper. But this has accelerated all of it tremendously, and we're still feeling that acceleration.
Yeah, let's shift now to the present, probably where most of us are in terms of our organizations and where we might be with digital transformation. And again, there's nothing negative. It's just good to do a self-assessment to kind of see where you are, and then how do you get moving. But the majority would fall by definition into the present. So let's talk about 2 or 3 big transformations that we see taking place now. And again, the ones we already mentioned obviously continue in perpetuity, but are there some new ones that have come up sort of in the more present times in terms of digital transformation?
Well, I think one thing that needs to be called out is just that the distribution of care and outcomes is uneven in this country, and it's a serious and significant problem. And I think that a focus of health systems on social determinants of care is good. I think digital has lots of promise for addressing it, but they're significant, and at the same time, we're under more pressure, workforce pressure than ever in healthcare. So we've got some dangers, I think, or challenges to address. But when I think about the big transformations right now, one builds on what we just talked about, which is really, I would call it sort of the injection of digital into the fabric of care, rather than being something separate that you do or something in addition to what you do. I think the promise for the hybrid between digital or virtual and physical is huge, and those health systems that can build it into the workflow, into the patient experience, and just as importantly into the provider experience, have the opportunity to gain, to grow, to be more efficient, and to have happier patients and providers. So that's number one. Number two for me is sort of using the technology that we have to better understand and calibrate care to the individual patient. And this really can look different ways. One It can be the growing use of CRM or customer relationship management systems to take what you know about a consumer and actually drive that into how you care for them. What's their level of education? What is their comfort level with providers or with technology? How do we best interact with them? So personalization in terms of communication has such power. It's been done on the retail side for so long, and it's long overdue for healthcare. But one of the best examples of this is, we see in remote patient monitoring. Not all diabetes patients are the same. Some might really benefit and use, a wireless glucometer, right? Wow, really help them get their A1C under control. But there are many who that's too complicated. They don't want devices. So how can you interact with that diabetes patient and have them be adherent to their, the best levels of care? And we know devices can make a huge difference, but adherence and education and engagement also on its own can make a huge difference. So that's number two. Number three, it's hard to narrow them down, but number three for me is really the use of AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to drive automation and leverage data sets to make care more efficient, to be more personal, to increase the population of patients that providers can care for. Tremendous potential there, and I think there's a lot of transformation beginning, and we've just started.
Yeah, those are all key transformations that are currently taking place. Another one is the shift in leadership in terms of the role of the CIO really morphing in many cases to this chief digital officer. We've tackled this topic on this webinar previously, where we're seeing a lot of CDOs being created, and not always are they coming from a CIO. So sometimes you do see that CIO gets promoted to CDO, but many times they're coming from outside other industries, and sometimes having the CIOs report to them. And my take-home message, and there's different reasons for why that's happening, but I think one thing that we all need to be acutely aware of is that our role for those who are with us that are CIOs, our role is dramatically shifting. And it had in the past, right? We were operators, then it became strategic, you were in the C-suite, but today it's even beyond that. And so you have to make sure that you, just like you retool the organization with virtual care and things like that, you have to retool yourself. And so again, I don't want to jump to the practical part.
There's so much we could say on all of these things. We could double the time, but what that reminds me of is sort of probably the most critical piece. And let's take all of the things we say are critically important, all the items we've talked about, but the true role for leadership is really around change management now, more than anything else. It's like there's so many opportunities, but how do you choose the right opportunities? And how do you get your workforce to adopt new ways of doing things that cross traditional boundaries, cross departments, cross disciplines, shake up the way we deliver primary care, the way we support people after they leave the hospital. And there's big trends that are driving this, but I think those who will really win are those who figure out how to adopt, change, and accelerate their use of digital across their workforce with their patients, et cetera.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because as we all know, we all talk a great theory and strategy organizations, and for years have been talking about innovation, new care models, and yet there's very little progress, that many have experienced. There's definitely outliers, but it really, you have to accelerate that, in the present and going into the future.
If I can throw in a formula that I love. So I'll spend a lot of time thinking about what's the best solution I can get, but there's this formula. The performance of the system times the ability of people to use the system equals your results, which means that you can have a mediocre system and fantastic people and get great results, or you can have a fantastic system and low ability to adopt it and have terrible results. So it just points to the fact that change management, adoption, stakeholder engagement is just really critical to driving these changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're sprinkling a lot of practical things throughout. So hopefully it's helpful for some of you. Please ask questions or and drop any comments in the question box. We're about halfway through. We're going to shift now to the future, but we definitely want to hear from you. And if you have counterpoints too, or something like we missed in a big way, please feel free to put that in the question box. So, one thing that struck me, Oliver, as we shift into the future here, you've mentioned a couple times that you almost have to be bimodal, right? The physical and the virtual, and do it quickly. And I was just thinking, as you were sharing that our traditional ways of measuring our health system, what's the first thing people do in presentations? I come from so-so hospital. We have 30 hospitals. We have 100,000 employees. I don't think those are key indicators anymore. It's obviously about outcomes, but it's also about the modalities that you offer and the different reach, because it doesn't really matter. In fact, some of those stats that we've been very proud of in the past can be a burden in a sense. If you have a tremendous amount of brick and mortar investment, and now we're moving virtual and so forth, it can be counterproductive at times. So I think we definitely need to move our measures in terms, into clinical outcomes and other things like that. So let's do that and shift to the future. So what are 2 or 3 transformational things? And again, as I mentioned, we've already mentioned some that are into the future as well as it matures. But what are 2 or 3 other things, Oliver, that I think we'll see coming up that we should be prepared for?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I picked 3. I'm sure you've got some to add to it, Ed. But one I would say is I think what we've started to see with chatbots and virtual triage solutions is the beginning of what I think will become digital health assistants, where you've got a tool that knows you, what you like, and how you work, and it is your interface. What do I need to do for insurance? How do I find the right doctor? What forms do I need to do? How do I do my bills and appointments? What do I need to do to adhere to my care plan? And do I have health alerts? I can see all of those things in an assistant that runs from your smartwatch or your smartphone to make the complicated interactions that we have today to figure out who are we going to, where are they, when do we have to fill out the forms, all that crap, honestly, that makes healthcare so difficult to be either deliver or to receive. I think we're going to have digital assistants to help us do that. So one, I see those becoming much more powerful. At a bigger lens, I think there's going to be merger and acquisition activity much broader and deeper, both within solution companies, because there's so many startups today. I think that's going to start to shake out. We've already seen the beginning of acquisitions to create sort of broader digital platforms, but also from even a health system perspective, I think the traditional hospitals who've been slow to engage in digital are going to start subperforming, perhaps even more. So that I think we're going to see merger and acquisition in the actual health delivery system, but I think it's going to look different. It's not just going to be hospital A is buying some hospitals from health system B, but it may be disruptors acquiring health systems. It may be insurers acquiring health systems. And or health systems acquiring disruptors. So I think there's some big shakeups headed our ways, but I believe at the end of the day, it's going to actually end up with a little bit more efficient integrated systems, which I think digital has the opportunity to provide, but our complicated landscape makes it much more difficult than it needs to be. What would you add, Ed? I'm sure you've got some other thoughts too.
Yeah, well, you hit on a lot that I think a lot about. One, I'll further expand on it and then introduce a new one. We're already seeing that with payers now have more physicians than providers, and primary care specifically, used to be the base for a hospital or health system for their success was having a great PCP base, which then refers to specialists who then utilize that hospital. Well, we've seen that change, and now payers have more physicians than the hospitals do. But now we're seeing payers also move into home care, and we're moving to hospital at home. So we're moving to hospital at home, and I see payers being very, very aggressive in this space. And so I think that's something to be thinking about if you're a hospital leader. what are some things you can do, and we'll get into that in a second. So the whole hospital at home movement, the payer disintermediation of healthcare. I love what you said about disruptor buying hospital health system. I could see that happening as well. And then the other thing, more back on the operational level, but still transformation, is the sourcing of those things that are considered commodities. So, there was a trend, I don't know, 20 years ago where people were sourcing technology. It kind of went back in-house, and now we're seeing it go back out again, and including cyber, right? Because we didn't touch on cybersecurity, but obviously there's a lot of attention, appropriately so on cybersecurity. And I think hospitals are probably realized, we're really good at clinical care, but maybe cybersecurity is something that someone else might be able to handle better for us. And so we're seeing I think we're going to see more shift back to sort of selective sourcing in the future. So those were a couple things that I was thinking about. And generally, Oliver, and I know you and Avia feel the same way. I would love to see this go from transformation to transition. So we talk a lot about transformation. It's like, okay, now let's actually do it in transition, and then we'll come up with a new buzzword to get us to the next level, in a couple of years. So I sort of think that's where we are. So we're gonna now sort of focus on some practical things. We've been dropping a few practical things here and there along the way. So in the last couple of minutes, we'll try to give you some practical things depending on where you are on that scale. And again, it's a continuum. No one fits perfect in any of those boxes, but as a frame of reference, it might be helpful. So again, if you have any questions or comments, you can drop those in the comment box. We are live and happy to interact directly with you. So let's go back to the past. So there's probably a fair amount of our audience that's listening, thinking, I think that's where we are. So we really haven't taken a hold of some of these newer things in the present and future. So Oliver, what would you suggest, maybe one or two things that if you were a leader in that organization that they might want to do to get to the next level?
Well, if you're sort of fall in this group of traditional health systems, and by that I mean health systems that have done what they've done well and continue to do it pretty much the same way, I think there's a couple things that you really need to do. One, if you don't have a digital front door, or your digital front door is either broken or sticky or doesn't open all the way, you got to fix that. It's table stakes, and consumers are more picky, more impatient, more knowledgeable, and have the ability to choose others more than they've ever had before. So that's something you need to fix, like ASAP. Second, if you're behind, you should consider partnering with a disruptor to more quickly accelerate your capabilities. But what I would say along with that is be careful. There's a lot of different models out there, and some of them really aren't to your advantage. So think carefully about what kind of relationship you want. They can play a great role in giving you capabilities and transitioning you to take those on yourself. But I remember talking to one partner several years ago, and I said, that's great that you train people in doing it themselves, but the majority of your business seems to be delivering it. And how many have actually taken it all in-house? 0 was the answer. So something to be cautious about. But those are two things I would recommend, and probably there's a third, which is educate yourself on the art of the possible. There's so many things that can be done today. Don't think what you knew 3 years ago is true. Things are different, but at the same time, balance your excitement. Don't get shiny object syndrome, right? You need a strategy once you understand the possibilities. Otherwise, you could get distracted, and that leads down a challenging path. So those are just a couple. Ed, what would you add to that?
Yeah, so I'll give you one other one, and then the second one that'll lead into the present. So yeah, and you just mentioned the word strategy. So when I reached out to my peers and had to develop strategies, I would always be, hey, do you have a strategy? Can you send it? And everyone says they have a strategy, but when you get right down to it, they might, but it's in their mind, or it's not really well written. And so that is to get a strategy. So develop a strategy. And so a lot of organizations don't have a strategy. It was rather surprising And it's okay when it's not, again, nothing negative. It's just like, if that's where you are, that's cool. At least you have that awareness and develop a strategy. So that's the first thing, because without a strategy, you're going to wander. And
Yep.
if you look back when we had to do application rationalization, and you look back at the spaghetti systems that we all had, it's for a lack of strategy in many cases. So even if you're doing M&A, you have a strategy and you get people on appropriate systems. So
Yep.
I really a lot on that. So
And what I would, if I could just add to that, Ed, it would be, don't have too narrow a one, because, you know, we might say, hey, I want a strategy around provider acquisition, or I want a strategy around virtual visits. Those are all important, but tools are so much bigger. The capabilities and opportunities are so much bigger. I would, you know, say take a larger strategy lens so you can figure out how the pieces fit together optimally for your organization.
all right, so we're going to head into the present because we're on our home stretch. We want to make sure, again, make it really practical. So I told you I'd lead into the present with this, and that is retool yourself. I mentioned that earlier. Think of yourself as the chief digital officer, no matter what your title is, if that's your sort of role in your organization, and start hanging out with chief digital officers outside of healthcare, and spend I can't say most of your time, spend half your time in other industries, finding out what's going on, because that's often the future. So that's what I would do in the present, because I think most people are sort of in that transition, wondering what to do, and do they have the right tools. So Oliver, over to you.
Yeah, completely agree. I sort of put that under the category of sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. But the two other things I would add is, one, you know, double down on specialty care. For many, specialty care is so challenging, long wait times, you know, patient dissatisfier, overload of work, yet utilization is always a problem. But the opportunities for specialty folks to work virtually, to extend their reach geographically, are really big. And so thinking about service line expansion or service line strategy around digital, there's tremendous opportunities there from a specialty standpoint. So I'd urge thought about that. And then I would really say learn from others. Look at those health systems that are innovating. Look at those disruptors that are getting traction out there, and think about, you know, is that something I could do, and learn where they're successful and where they're not. I think honestly, one of the biggest hallmarks for why Avi has been so successful in recent years is that with such a large network sharing their lessons learned, where they've succeeded, what they failed across a huge continuum of care, really allows us to share best practices and help accelerate strategy. So there's so much that you can learn from others. It's myopic to just only think about your own organization, but it's also natural. So, you know, work against that to educate yourself on what the opportunities and possibilities are.
All right, so in the last 2 minutes, we're going to do speed round, Oliver, like 3-4 word answers. Like if you're in the future or want to be there, or create the future, we're going to do speed round back and forth. And then we have one final question from the audience. So what are 2 or 3 things that you might do to help best create that future? What should you be thinking about?
For me, it would absolutely figure out how to incorporate digital into making providers' lives easier and patients' lives more convenient.
All right, so I will go with have your CEO, whatever steering committee you have, IT steering committee, whatever you call it, CEO is going to be your co-chair. Back to you, Oliver.
I would say sign up for a disruptive app and see what it's like.
Yeah, love it. And the final one, and it's actually Oliver's, I'm stealing it from him, make sure you resource for the long term. So it's better to do 2 things really well than 10 things mediocre, and that was part of your formula earlier. So we're going to end with the audience question. So Oliver, we have 30 seconds to answer this question. It's a good one because it's related to digital transformation strategy. Are we over-reliant on looking for a platform solution that does everything? What's the right mix of best of breed?
That's such a critical question. We get it all the time, you know, and I sort of have a 1, 2, 3 formula. 1 is, what do you have today? 2, where are your operational pain points? And 3, let's find a way to rationalize. So platform is just such an overused word. There's a million platforms. Everyone says there's a platform. When is it a platform versus an application? To me, it's all about utility. I want the 80-20 rule applied. I'd rather have one solution that does, 10 things 80% than 10 solutions that do 10 things at 100%.
All right, so you can see why Oliver was our guest. Thank you so much. Hopefully we dropped like 10 practical things that you might do. Hopefully one of them helps you. Thank you for being part of Digital Voices, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Ed. It was a pleasure. Take care, everyone.